"We don't have space for you. Get out, my son." Said so I left, but next day, the soup was still hot. That's what I remember most clearly. The rosemary I'd clipped fresh from my little garden hours earlier still danced in the steam. My hands, veined steady, a little sore from arthritis, hovered above the pot as I stirred gently. The table was already set, 4 bowls cloth napkins, folded into triangles, a pitcher of sweet tea. Everything was ready, but they didn't come. I stood by the stove in my quiet kitchen in Asheville, North Carolina, waiting for my son to call out from the hallway, or for my daughter-in-law to bring down the baby. Even just the sound of little Lucas's feet pitter-pattering across the hardwood would have been enough. Instead, it was my son's voice, low but firm, drifting in from the living room. "We don't have space for you. You need to go." He didn't say it to my face. He said it to his wife, not knowing I was just down the hall, ears sharper than they thought, especially when the words were sharp too. My breath caught in my throat, still holding the ladle. For a second I hoped I'd misheard, but she responded with a laugh and a shrug. "She's sweet, but it's been 3 months. This house is small. 3 months. 3 months since I gave up my apartment to help them. 3 months since I moved in to care for my grandson when daycare got too expensive and they both had to go back to work full-time. 3 months since I told myself this is what family is for, and now I was an unwanted fixture, too much in the way. I didn't march in there to defend myself. I didn't yell or cry. I didn't even let the soup burn. Instead, I turned off the stove. I walked back to the small guest room they gave me, the one I'd painted for them before they moved in, because it was once supposed to be Lucas's nursery. I folded my nightgown into the suitcase, packed the medicine for my hip, pulled my cardigan over my shoulders, and looked around the room, trying to memorize the way it looked in that final moment, trying to decide if I should feel angry or just quietly ashamed for not seeing this coming. I didn't say goodbye, not because I wanted to make a scene, but because there was nothing left to say. I'd heard what I needed to hear. By the time I stepped out the front door, dusk had settled over the porch like a blanket. The neighborhood kids were riding bikes. Someone was grilling burgers 2 houses down. Normal, easy life, except for me, an old woman with a floral suitcase and nowhere to go. The air was crisp for a North Carolina evening in spring. I gripped the handle of my luggage and paused at the bottom step. Did he even mean it? Or was it just one of those tired, careless things people say when they're overwhelmed? The kind of thing that slices you clean, but they never realize they said it until you've bled out completely. I stood there in that pause, waiting for the door to creak open, for someone to come out and stop me. But nothing came, just the sound of a baby crying upstairs, and the TV flickering through the living room window. I walked to my car. The back seat still had Lucas's old toys, soft dinosaurs, a wrinkled coloring book. I sat behind the wheel and let my hand rest on the gear shift, not starting the engine. For a long minute, I just sat, staring out at the sidewalk. Where do you go when your child tells you you're not needed, not wanted? I didn't have an answer. Maybe that was the worst part. I had a small pension, a few hundred in checking. Most of my savings were still tied up in the house. I helped them buy, ironically, the very house I was now being told I didn't belong in. I turned the ignition. The engine coughed and sputtered like it didn't want to leave either. I drove with no direction, just instinct passing familiar landmarks blurred by dusk. The elementary school where I'd waited for my son after soccer practice. The diner where I used to stop for coffee after night shifts. The nursing home I almost took a job at, but didn't. because I thought helping my son raise Lucas would be more meaningful. Funny how meaning can evaporate in a sentence. I ended up in the parking lot of that same all-night diner, the one with flickering neon lights and tired waitresses with kind eyes. I pulled into a spot in the back corner. My body hurt from the tension. I tilted the seat back and closed my eyes. And that's how the night began, in my car with the scent of rosemary still clinging to my sleeves, and the warmth of the soup unserved, untouched, left behind. I thought of the table, set for 4, but one of us was never really invited to sit down. The heater in my car wheezed all night. It was spring, yes, but Asheville has a way of cooling down after dark, especially when you're alone and sleep refuses to come. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me and curled it up in the driver's seat. Knees stiff, feet cold, and pride shattered. Around 2 a.m., a group of teenagers pulled into the lot, laughing loud drunk on youth and milkshakes. I watched them from behind fogged windows. Their joy didn't annoy me. It reminded me. I used to laugh like that once, before life turned into a quiet rhythm of caregiving and compromise. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke with the first hints of pink cutting across the sky. The diner lights were still buzzing. My back screamed from the awkward position, and my hip felt like someone had tightened it with a wrench. I blinked at the condensation on the windshield, then rubbed it away with the edge of my sleeve. I sat up straighter and stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. Hair tousled, eyes, swollen lips pale. I looked older than 69, older than the woman who had stirred soup just 12 hours earlier, still believing that love was enough to make someone stay. I rummaged through my purse and pulled out a small tin of mints. That was breakfast, along with a bottle of water that had rolled under the seat. I didn't want to go inside the diner, didn't want to talk, didn't want anyone asking if I was okay. I wasn't. Instead, I started driving. No plan, just miles. I passed closed shops, early dog walkers, a jogger stretching by a lamppost. The town I'd lived in for over 40 years suddenly felt foreign. Where do you go when your own blood turns you out? I thought of calling my friend Carol from church, but she was in Florida now living, with her daughter probably making breakfast for her grandkids in a kitchen where she was loved. I thought of my cousin Jeanette, but we hadn't spoken since my sister's funeral. And besides, the last thing I wanted was to explain anything. Explaining meant reliving. Explaining meant admitting that I had become a burden. I drove past the sign for Beechwood Trailer Park. My hand tightened on the wheel. It had been 14 years since I last saw my brother Henry. We had fought after Mama's will was read something about the property line and old debt. We both said things, ugly things, and then we stopped saying anything. But he was the only one left, the only one who might still have a little space for me. I hesitated at the turn. My pride screamed at me to keep driving, but pride hadn't kept me warm last night. Pride hadn't looked me in the eye and said, "You matter." So I turned. The trailer park hadn't changed much. The gravel still crunched the same under my tires. The aluminum siding on the units still gleamed in that faded way, like a memory wearing thin. I pulled up in front of number 12. His mailbox was crooked. The porch light flickered, not quite dead, not quite alive. I sat there for a minute, 2. Then I gathered my things, just one bag really. The rest I'd left behind without ceremony. As I climbed the porch steps, I thought of all the things I could say. I have nowhere else to go. I'm sorry it took me this long to come back. I heard your health hasn't been good. Please don't turn me away too. But when the door opened, Henry just stood there, shirt half buttoned. Scruffy, tired blinking against the morning light. He didn't ask why I was there, didn't ask what had happened. He just stepped aside. "Coffee's on," he grunted. "Hope you still take it black." I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. I stepped inside into the smell of old wood instant coffee and something fried from last night. His place was small, cluttered, lived in, but warm. God, it was warm. He shuffled toward the kitchenette, scratching his head. "You want eggs? I can make you eggs." I shook my head. "No, just coffee's fine." He poured me a cup and slid it across the counter. "You look like hell," he muttered, but not unkindly. I smiled despite myself. "You don't look much better." We sat. Silence sat with us, but not the kind that hurts, the kind that understands. After a few sips, he leaned back and looked at me. "You gonna tell me what happened?" I stared at my cup. "Maybe later." He nodded. "Later's fine." I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't cried. But in that moment, in that quiet kitchen, with the smell of burnt toast and coffee grounds, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Safe. It took me 3 whole days before I spoke the full truth. Henry didn't press. That was his way, always had been. He gave you space, and maybe that's why we'd gone so long without talking. We were 2 people who never knew how to say what we needed to say. But he let me stay. No timeline, no questioning, no awkward glances toward the door. Just a folded blanket on the couch and a muttered use the shower first if you want. The trailer groaned and creaked at night. The springs in the couch were stubborn, and the water heater barely lasted through 1 warm rinse. But the quiet was kind. I'd forgotten what that sounded like. On the 3rd morning, I watched Henry from the tiny kitchen table as he stood frying bologna in a pan like it was still 1982. The scent was oddly comforting. He was humming something low, maybe a hymn, maybe a country song, and it stirred something in me. That's when the words finally came. "I was helping my son," I said, breaking the silence. He didn't turn, just kept moving the meat around in the pan with the back of a fork. "I gave up my apartment, moved in to help with Lucas. They said it was temporary." Still, he didn't speak, but he listened. I cooked, cleaned, took care of the baby. Tried not to be in the way. My hands were shaking. Then one night I heard him say there wasn't space for me anymore. Henry finally turned off the burner. The hiss of the pan faded into silence. He plated the meat, walked over, and set it down between us. "You gave him everything he said, not as a question." I nodded. He took a bite, chewed slowly. "And that's how he thanked you." There was no judgment in his tone, just confirmation. A witness to the verdict I'd been trying not to accept. I think I always knew, I whispered. His wife never liked having me there. I could feel it. The way she smiled too tightly. The way she started calling me her instead of mom when she thought I wasn't listening. He looked at me then, really looked. "You're not crazy, Elle. Some people just forget who raised them." It wasn't profound, but it broke something loose inside me. I cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet tears that soaked into the sleeves of my cardigan as I sat there over a paper plate of fried bologna and white toast. Henry didn't try to stop me. He just pushed the napkin holder closer and let me fall apart without making me feel like I had to explain it. When the tears dried and my breath steadied, he nodded once and got up to refill the coffee pot. That day I sat out on the front step, watching the dust rise as a maintenance truck rattled down the gravel road. The air smelled like grass clippings and laundry detergent. A woman 2 trailers down was hanging sheets on the line, humming softly to herself. I should have felt humiliated, sleeping on my brother's couch after being discarded like an old rug. But instead I felt oddly still. I didn't owe anyone anything anymore. Not the dinner I'd never got to serve. Not the babysitting I did for free. Not the sweet tea I made every afternoon because they liked it a certain way. I had given and given and given until I was a ghost in my own life. Now I was somewhere I hadn't planned to be, surrounded by rusted porch furniture and wind chimes that never stopped clinking. But I was real here, not invisible, not extra. That evening I took a walk around the trailer park, past old dogs barking behind chain-link fences, past someone grilling ribs and yelling for their kid to bring back the mustard. It was a place where people had hard lives but soft hearts. Everyone nodded, everyone waved. When I got back, Henry was asleep in his chair, one slipper half off a rerun, playing low on the TV. On the counter sat a folded dish towel, a warm cup of tea, and a note. "You're not a burden. Get some rest. Tomorrow we go fishing." I smiled. Not because I liked fishing, I didn't. I hated bugs, and the boat always made me dizzy. But because someone remembered me, without asking for anything in return. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like running. I didn't feel disposable. I felt like I might maybe start belonging again. The next morning, I stood at the edge of the dock, holding a rusted tackle box and a borrowed fishing rod that was older than my grandson. The lake was still as glass, save for the slow ripples drifting from Henry's little motorboat. He was already aboard, sitting back in the cracked vinyl seat, chewing on a toothpick, like he had all the time in the world. "I'm not getting in that thing," I called out. "It looks like it's made of duct tape and memories." He chuckled. "Suit yourself, but I ain't dragging the fish back." I hesitated, not because of the boat, though yes. It was one good storm away from sinking, but because part of me still felt frozen, like if I let myself enjoy something again, even for one morning, it meant I was moving on. And I didn't know if I was ready for that. But he looked so calm out there, so unbothered, like the world had wronged him a few too many times, and he'd just decided not to care. So I climbed in. It rocked under my weight. My knees cracked as I sat. The morning sun was warm on my face, the lake air laced with moss and pine. "You remember when Dad used to take us out to Lake Glen?" he asked. I smiled. "Yeah, he always said we weren't allowed to talk, that it scared the fish. He just didn't want to hear us bicker." We both laughed, softly, carefully, like people remembering how to be siblings. For an hour we sat in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't demand anything. I let my feet rest in the boat, my eyes following the dance of light on the water. And then I said, "Did I do something wrong?" Henry didn't pretend not to understand. He reeled in, slowly checked his hook. "No," he said, "you did something right. You raised a man who thinks he's too big for the people who made him. That's not on you. But I gave him everything I didn't have growing up. I worked double shifts, missed holidays, took out loans. I wanted him to feel safe, and he did, so safe he forgot where the warmth came from. His words didn't make it better, but they made it clearer. I stared at my hands, veined, calloused, still marked from years of labor. Hands that had lifted a crying baby. Hands that had cooked and folded and mended. Hands that had been open, always open, until the day they were no longer wanted. Henry cast his line again. "Maybe it's time you stop giving," he said. "Let him learn what it costs when the well runs dry." We didn't catch a single fish that morning, but I came back to the trailer with something else, a strange, gentle spark. Like maybe I could begin again. Like maybe the story didn't end at my son's front door. That afternoon, I took a walk into town, just a few blocks, past the post office, the hardware store, the church with the lopsided steeple. I stopped at a diner and bought myself a cup of coffee, black strong bitter, as the truth I was learning to live with. As I sipped, I noticed a flyer on the bulletin board seeking volunteer local women's shelter needs kitchen help. I stared at it longer than I meant to. I didn't tear it down, didn't call, not yet. But I let the idea sit inside me like warm soup waiting on the stove. On my way back to the trailer, I passed a boutique thrift shop and saw a little blue sweater in the window, soft, warm secondhand. I thought of Lucas, wondered if he'd gotten taller, wondered if he missed me. My chest tightened, then loosened. I realized I could miss him and still not go back. I realized I could grieve what I lost without trying to earn my place again. That night I cooked dinner for Henry. Nothing fancy, just baked chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes. He grunted his approval between bites and even offered to wash the dishes, though I ended up doing it anyway. Habit, I suppose. Before bed, I opened my old journal, the one I hadn't touched in over a year, and I wrote today I chose not to disappear. It wasn't a victory, but it was something. The next few days settled into a rhythm. I rose early just after Henry. He had a habit of turning on the coffee pot before dawn, as if the scent of brewing beans could summon the sun itself. We didn't speak much in the mornings, and I liked it that way. There was something sacred in the silence between us, like we were rebuilding something fragile with every shared glance and nod. I cleaned up a bit around the trailer, wiped down the dusty blinds, reorganized the pantry, folded laundry that wasn't mine. Henry never said thank you, not out loud, but he started making extra toast in the mornings and leaving the butter out for me. That was enough. One afternoon, I walked back into town. The volunteer flyer was still posted on the diner's board edges, curling now. I don't know what made me pull the tag this time, maybe the steady quiet of my days, or the ache in my hands that missed having something to do. I called the number from the payphone outside the post office. A young woman named Karen answered. Her voice was bright, efficient, too fast, until I said I was calling about the kitchen help. Then she softened. "We'd love to have you," she said. "We just lost our Sunday cook. And honestly, the girls need someone who reminds them that kindness still exists." That Sunday, I showed up at the shelter with a clean apron, a basket of canned tomatoes I'd picked up on discount, and the only recipe I still knew by heart, my mother's lentil stew. The kitchen was small. The knives were dull. The pots were scarred. But when the girls came in one by one, tired, hollow-eyed, wary, and smelled the stew, they smiled. That night I watched as they ate and laughed. Quietly, carefully. They reminded me of myself, and something inside me shifted. Not healed, not fixed, but shifted. I began volunteering every week, then twice a week, then 4. The shelter became a new kind of home, not because it was warm or well lit or cheerful, but because I was needed there, not out of obligation, not as someone's extra mouth, but as a woman who had lived through hurt and come out still offering warmth. Word must have traveled because one morning a knock came at Henry's trailer. It was late spring by then. The azaleas had bloomed, and the air smelled like rain and pavement. I opened the door with a dish rag still in hand, and there he was, my son. He looked older, paler, less certain. His hair was messy like he hadn't slept. His eyes darted behind me, searching the dim interior. "Mom," he said, "just that." I didn't answer. He tried again. I didn't mean it like that. That night, we were tired, stressed. It was just a moment. I kept holding the dish rag. "You told your wife you didn't have space for me." He flinched. "It wasn't like that." I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry, just stood there in my brother's borrowed doorway, the smell of bleach and boiled greens still clinging to my clothes. I made space, I said gently. In my home, in my life, for years, even when I didn't have room to spare. He looked down, I know. Silence hung between us. A different silence now, one shaped by guilt, not grace. He shifted on the step. Lucas misses you. He asks where you went. I swallowed. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. He's just a child, I said. It's your job to teach him how to treat people. My son blinked hard. I came to say I'm sorry, and to ask if you'd consider coming back. I looked over my shoulder at the trailer, small, messy, noisy, with a TV rerun playing somewhere inside. Then I thought of the women at the shelter, the pot of soup simmering for them today, the soft smile on Karen's face when I walked in. I turned back to my son. No, I said, but thank you for coming. He looked like he didn't know what to say, like no had never been handed to him so quietly before. I didn't shut the door. I let him stand there with it open. He nodded once, then turned and walked back to his car. I stood there long after he drove away, the screen door creaking in the wind. Henry walked up behind me with a slice of pie in hand. That was him, huh? I nodded. He handed me the pie, took him long enough. I took a bite. It was apple, too sweet, just right. I didn't tell anyone at the shelter about the visit. Not Karen, not the girls, not even Henry, really. I just sat with it, let it settle in my bones like old weather, like an ache I no longer needed to explain. Because some wounds didn't need to be reopened just to prove they existed. They lived in me now, but they no longer ran me. Life moved on. Each morning I got up early, brushed my thinning hair, put on my sturdy shoes, and walked to the shelter with a sense of purpose. I started adding little extras to the meal's fresh herbs. When I could afford them, cinnamon in the oatmeal handwritten notes, on napkins that said things like, "You're stronger than yesterday." Some of the women would read them, some would tuck them into pockets. One girl, Ria, started saving hers in a shoebox. One day she asked, "Why do you do all this? You're not even getting paid." I smiled, because I know what it's like to be forgotten. And I'd rather die standing in a kitchen full of strangers than live quietly in a house where I don't exist. She didn't answer, but she hugged me that night when she left. It was the kind of hug that holds on a little longer, the kind that says thank you without the shame. At the trailer, Henry was healing in his own way, too. He let me drive his old pickup once a week, now just to keep it alive, he said. But I could tell it meant more. He started asking me questions about Mama, about the past, about the things we never talked about when we were younger. "I guess I thought you had it all figured out," he said once while we watched a rainstorm beat against the window. "You were always the one holding things together." I let out a soft laugh. I was holding them together with string and prayer. He shook his head, still held. That night I wrote a letter. Not to anyone, not to my son, just to myself. "Dear Eleanor, I'm proud of you. For walking away when it hurt. For not begging. For finding purpose in a place you never expected. For choosing quiet dignity over loud disappointment. For surviving one of the most invisible kinds of heartbreak, there is being told you're no longer needed." I folded the letter and slipped it into the back of my journal. I didn't need to read it again. I just needed to write it. A week later, Karen asked if I'd consider taking a more official role at the shelter. Nothing full-time, just a small stipend for meals and a few more responsibilities. I said yes. Not for the money, but because the title kitchen manager felt like more than a label. It felt like I was allowed to belong again. Henry celebrated with dollar store sparkling grape juice, and a pan of brownies he burned at the edges. He was gruff about it, but I caught him smiling. I started keeping a jar on the counter. Every time something small went right, an extra bag of donations, a girl finding a job, a letter from someone's family. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper and dropped it in. Hope I labeled it just that. Hope didn't mean things would be perfect. It just meant I wasn't done. And as for my son, he texted once more. Just a photo of Lucas holding a finger-painted card that read, "I miss Nana." No words attached. I stared at it for a long while. My heart swelled, but I didn't reply. Love is still love even when it hurts. But boundaries, I've learned, are how we teach people to honor it properly. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen window of the trailer, not for anyone to see, just for me, just to mark a moment, that I was here, that I had survived the unspoken heartbreak of being pushed aside, that I still had something left to give. Summer rolled in like a tide I hadn't asked for. The heat pressed against the trailer walls thick and slow, making the evenings feel like long sighs. Henry set up a box fan in the living room that whirred loud enough to drown out the TV, but we didn't mind. It reminded me of my childhood summers, open windows, damp necklines, the hum of something always trying to cool the air, but never quite managing it. One Saturday morning, I walked to the shelter with a basket of ripe peaches someone from the church had donated. Their skin was warm from the sun, and their scent clung to my hands. I made peach cobbler for lunch, letting the smell fill the kitchen, letting sweetness touch a place in all of us that had gone dry for too long. That day, a new woman arrived. Her name was Melanie, young, thin as paper, eyes that darted like a stray cat's. She didn't speak much, and she wouldn't eat the first night. But I made extra cobbler anyway and left it near her cot with a spoon and a napkin. By morning, the dish was scraped clean. That's the thing about feeding people. You don't just feed their stomachs. You tell them you matter, you're still here, I see you. And in seeing them, I started to see myself again. One afternoon, as I was folding towels in the shelter's back room, Karen came in with a letter. "This came for you." I blinked. "For me." She nodded and handed it over. The envelope was pale blue. Familiar handwriting. My heart stalled. I opened it slowly. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From something quieter. Something close to grief. It was from my grandson. "Dear Nana," it read in wobbly crayon-colored lines. "I don't know why you don't live with us anymore. Mommy says you're on a trip. Daddy says you're helping people. I miss your soup, the green one with the little noodles." I laughed softly. He meant spinach and orzo. It was his favorite. "I got a gold star at school. Mommy put it on the fridge. I asked if we could call you. She said not today, so I drew you a picture instead." Inside was a folded piece of paper with a shaky drawing, a stick figure woman in a pink dress, standing by a pot with a smiling boy beside her. "Me and Nana," it said. I pressed the letter to my chest. I didn't cry, not right away. I closed my eyes and let the ache rise and fall. Not the sharp pain of rejection anymore, but the dull, steady sorrow of distance that shouldn't have existed in the first place. That night, I wrote him back. "My sweet boy, I miss you too. I am helping people who need warmth, just like we all do. One day, I hope you'll understand how important it is to give love even when it's hard. And yes, I'll teach you how to make that soup. I promise. Love always, Nana." I mailed it the next morning with a hand-drawn recipe tucked inside. I didn't know if he'd get it. I didn't know if his mother would even let him open it. But I needed him to know I hadn't just disappeared, that I was still here. that I never stopped loving him even from afar. Back at the trailer, Henry was fixing the back step. He was down on one knee, swearing softly at a rusted nail. "You good?" he asked when I came up behind him. I nodded, slipping the peach-scented envelope into my pocket. "Yeah, I think I am." He stood, wiped his hands on a rag. "You look lighter." "I feel it." That evening we sat outside with lemon iced tea in jelly jars. The wind carried the scent of cut grass and grilled meat from somewhere down the hill. Fireflies blinked in and out of view like tiny lanterns trying to guide lost hearts home. Henry leaned back in his chair. "Funny, isn't it? What is how things break just to come together again in a different shape?" I smiled. "Yeah, it is." Because he was right. I hadn't gone back. I hadn't begged. I hadn't forced myself into spaces where love had to be earned like rent. Instead, I had found something better, people who needed the kind of love I still had left to give. And in giving it, I realized it was never about being needed. It was about being whole, on my own. And finally, I was. Fall crept in, slow slipping over the town like an old sweater, familiar comforting worn at the elbows. The leaves turned rust red and pumpkin orange. The air smelled of chimney smoke and wet bark, and the sun no longer lingered past supper. At the shelter, the mood shifted too. The women started staying closer to the kitchen. Meals took longer. Conversation stretched into the after-dinner cleanup. There was something about autumn that made people crave more than food. They wanted safety, warmth, a voice that sounded like home. I became that voice somehow. "Miss Eleanor," one girl whispered as I handed her a plate of cornbread and stew, "you remind me of my grandma. She made me tea when I had nightmares." "Would she sing to you?" I asked. She nodded. "Always." That night I hummed while washing dishes an old lullaby I hadn't thought of in years, the same one I used to sing to my son when he was sick, curled into my side in our one-bedroom apartment, his forehead hot, my hands cold from exhaustion. I had forgotten the lyrics, but the tune came back like muscle memory. I left the shelter that evening slower than usual. My legs were tired, my back ached, and the casserole pan had burned the tips of my fingers. But I was full in a way that had nothing to do with food or shelter or even love. It was something deeper, a knowing that I was not forgotten. At Henry's, the porch had been redone. He'd gotten a second-hand wooden swing from a neighbor, and we spent the evenings rocking, gently listening to the wind rustle the trees. He didn't talk much. I didn't need him to. Sometimes silence says everything. One Saturday morning, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I answered, cautious. "Hi, is this Eleanor Carter?" "This is she." "This is Helen from the Buncombe County Housing Office. You're listed as the primary owner of 134 Juniper Lane. We've received a notice from the current residents Bradley Carter and Elaine Carter requesting transfer of title. But the file shows no prior transfer recorded. Do you have a moment to clarify the situation?" I blinked. My son had tried to transfer my house without asking me. The house I helped renovate. The house I paid property tax on every year. The house that was still in my name. My mouth was dry. "There's been no authorized transfer," I said, steady. "That house is legally mine." "I thought so," she said. "We just needed confirmation before processing anything further." After I hung up, I sat at the table for a long while staring at my hands. My son hadn't just tried to erase me emotionally. He had tried to erase me legally. Henry came home from the hardware store just in time to find me staring at the table. "You look like someone ran over your cat," I told him. He didn't explode, didn't rant, just rubbed the back of his neck and muttered unbelievable. Then after a long pause, You know what you're going to do. I nodded. Yes, I did. That evening I wrote a letter. Not with bitterness, not with venom, but with calm, measured clarity. Bradley, I've received word of your attempt to transfer ownership of the house. As a reminder that property remains in my name, and any further attempt to claim it, without my consent, is not only disrespectful, but legally actionable. I will be placing the home under contract with a local women's housing nonprofit. Within 6 weeks, the title will be transferred to the organization. You will be notified in writing of the date you need to vacate. This is not punishment. This is protection, for me, for the next woman who may need refuge like I did. May this serve as your reminder when you discard people, you lose the right to the shelter they built around you. Eleanor. I folded it, sealed it, mailed it. Then I poured myself a cup of tea and added a fresh slip to my hope jar. Today I chose peace over pride. I didn't need revenge, I needed closure. And this was how I'd find it. The notice went out 2 weeks later. Certified mail, signature required. I didn't hear back, not right away. I half expected a flurry of voicemails, a rage-filled phone call, maybe even a tearful plea from my daughter-in-law. But silence has its own kind of weight. Heavy, intentional. Then, on a cold Thursday morning, just as the first frost crept across the grass, a car pulled up outside the shelter. Not the trailer, the shelter. I was in the kitchen chopping carrots when I looked through the small window that faced the street. I saw the familiar white SUV. My son stepped out first. He looked thinner. Not in the way people look when they diet, but in the way people look when life starts to strip them bare. Elaine followed, impeccably dressed, but her mouth was tight. Like every breath tasted bitter. And then came Lucas. He held a cardboard box with both hands, small arms wrapped tight around it. Something in me cracked open, just seeing him, those soft cheeks. That cowlick at the back of his head, the same one I used to smooth down every morning. Karen noticed me staring and asked, "Are you okay?" I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped outside. My son spotted me and straightened. "Mom, we brought some things from the house." I looked at the box. I didn't ask for anything back. "I know," he said quickly. Lucas insisted. I knelt so I could meet my grandson's eyes. "I made you something, Nana," he said, opening the flaps. Inside were folded drawings, a soup spoon tied with ribbon, and the little blue sweater I'd bought months ago. "It's yours," he said simply, "so you don't get cold." My hands trembled. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. "Thank you, sweetheart." Elaine cleared her throat. "We understand. About the house. Do you?" she continued. "I just wish it hadn't come to this." "You made it come to this," I said, calm, quiet, truthful. There was no malice in my voice, just weariness. My son looked away. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. I thought you'd always just be there." "I was," I said, even when I shouldn't have been. He looked as though he wanted to say more, but no words came. He reached into his pocket and held out a set of keys. "To the house," he said. "I figured you'd want to deliver them yourself." I stared at the keys for a long moment. Then I shook my head. "No, drop them at the nonprofit's office. This isn't mine anymore. It's going to someone who needs it more than any of us realized." He nodded slow. Elaine turned away. Lucas held my hand tightly. "Will I see you again, Nana?" I knelt eye to eye. "I hope so, love. But even if you don't, you'll always have my love in your pocket." I tapped his heart gently with my fingers. He hugged me with the kind of hug children give when they mean it. Arms wrapped fully, cheek pressed hard. When they left, I didn't go back inside right away. I stood in the brisk air, the wind tugging at my sleeves. The silence around me no longer lonely, just clean. Karen came out behind me. "That your family?" I exhaled. "Yes and no." She handed me a mug of tea. You okay? I think I'm finally learning what okay feels like. We stood there together, two women, two stories, both holding scars no one else could see. That night I made a double pot of stew. The girls sat long at the tables, laughing louder than usual. One of them, a woman named Diane, who never made eye contact before, came over to ask for seconds. I gave her thirds. Later, I lit a candle on the shelter's windowsill. Just one. Just for me. It flickered like a heartbeat. I sat beside it, sipping tea, and whispered quietly to the dark. I didn't go back. I didn't beg. I didn't fold. And still I was whole. November arrived dressed in gray, low skies, bare trees, and air that smelled like something waiting to end. At the shelter, we started preparing for the holiday season. Donations came in turkeys, canned yams, green beans, instant stuffing. People were generous when the calendar reminded them to be. I didn't mind. I knew better than most that a warm plate could feel like a second chance. I spent a full afternoon writing every woman's name on little place cards. Just their first names in careful cursive with a sprig of rosemary tucked into each one. It was silly, maybe, but I wanted them to feel seen, not processed, not temporary. Karen smiled when she saw the table. You really do turn every room into a home, she said. I paused, pressing a napkin into a neat triangle. Maybe it's because I know what it feels like when a home turns on you. She didn't ask questions. She never did. That was part of her kindness, never prying, never pushing, just making space. The night before Thanksgiving, I sat on the trailer's tiny porch swing, with a blanket draped over my lap and a mug of cider between my hands. Henry had gone to bed early, complaining about his knees, but really just tired from the way holidays pull at old ghosts. I understood. Holidays had a way of making every silence louder. I thought about the house on Juniper Lane, about the kitchen I once painted yellow, the swing set I helped assemble the hallway where I hung every school photo of Lucas. I wondered if they missed me, or if I was just a shadow they'd swept away to keep the light easier. I wondered if he understood now what it meant to have a mother who gave and gave and gave until she couldn't anymore. My thoughts were interrupted by headlights. A small sedan pulled into the trailer lot. My heart thudded once, then again. But it wasn't them. It was a young woman, early 20s maybe. She stepped out and looked around nervously before spotting me. Are you Miss Eleanor? I stood slowly. Yes. She clutched a folded envelope in her hand. I was told, someone here helped me once, gave me soup at the shelter last year. You left a note in my bowl, said you are still lovable. I blinked. The wind stirred the rosemary in the windowsill planter. I was in a bad place, she continued. Addiction, homelessness. I almost didn't make it. But that note, I kept it in my coat pocket. I read it every night. And when I finally got clean, I wanted to say thank you. She held out the envelope. It's not much, just a card. But I needed you to know. You mattered. I reached for it, stunned. My hands shook as I took it. She smiled. I've got a place now, a job at the daycare down the road. Still rough some days, but I'm here. We hugged. Not like strangers, like survivors. When she left, I went inside and sat at the small kitchen table. I opened the envelope. It was a simple card. Inside she had written, I didn't believe anyone could love someone like me until your soup told me otherwise. Thank you for feeding more than hunger. With love, Grace. I sat in silence for a long time, my fingers pressed over my lips. That night, I added one last note to my hope jar. The love I gave came back not from where I expected, but from where it was most needed. Thanksgiving Day came and went with warmth, laughter second helpings. At the shelter table, the women held hands. Some cried. All of them smiled when they saw their names, written down tucked beside rosemary, and little candles flickering bravely against the cold. I was no one's burden that day. I was no one's obligation. I was just Eleanor, and that for the first time in years was enough. Some apologies come too late to fix the past, but just in time to soften the future. That night, I held the locket in my palm as I wrote the last page in my journal for the year. I survived what tried to undo me. I found love again in unexpected places. I lost, yes, but I also became. I am no longer waiting for permission to be enough, and I believed it. As I turned out the lights, I glanced once more at the hope jar now nearly full. I whispered almost to myself, I am still here, still kind, still whole, still Eleanor. The winter softened its grip. By mid-January, the icicles had started to melt from the trailer's awning, dripping one by one into the brittle grass below. The mornings were still cold, but the light lasted longer and the air no longer bit so hard. A change was coming. You could feel it in the bones. At the shelter, we hung up new bulletin boards with words like resilience, hope, and worth, stenciled in bold across the top. Karen ordered a donation of paper journals, simple ones with blue covers and soft pages. Let them write it down, she said. Let them tell their own story. And so they did. One woman, Angela, wrote poems. Another drew little stick figure comics of her days coffee laundry group counseling repeat. A teenager named Ray started writing letters to herself. She read one aloud to me, once hands trembling. Dear me, you are not broken. You are building. I hugged her tightly. Somehow the love I used to pour into my family had found new containers. It didn't spill. It didn't drown me. It settled, grew roots, quiet, deep. That's what no one tells you about starting over. It's not fire and fury. It's soil and patience. It's deciding that your heart still has use, even if it was once discarded. At home, Henry was still. Henry grumbling about his knees, pretending not to like the shelter's leftover brownies. I brought home even though he always ate too. But he laughed more now, watched fewer reruns, took shorter naps. You know, he said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sky turn gold, you could stay here. Forever, I mean. I looked at the peeling paint on the railings, the wind chime swaying softly. You wouldn't get tired of me? I've been tired of you since 1972, he grinned. Doesn't mean I'd change a thing. We both laughed. Then I grew quiet, because something had been stirring in me. A thought I hadn't said aloud yet. One I hadn't even trusted myself to fully form. I've been thinking about finding my own place, I said. Nothing fancy, just a room of my own. Henry didn't flinch, didn't take offense. He just nodded. It's time. That night I took out my journal. On a fresh page I wrote, I am not running, I am planting. The next day I stopped by a small real estate office on Main Street. There was a listing for a converted cottage on the edge of town. Just one bedroom, tiny kitchen, slanted roof, but it had a porch and a window over the sink. I stood in that kitchen during the showing, imagining steam rising from a new pot of soup, a bookshelf in the corner, a coat hung on a hook by the door, a home, not someone else's, mine. The realtor handed me a pen. I signed the lease. When I told Henry, he gave me a side hug, gruff and awkward, the way only brothers can. You better visit. I'm not learning how to make your cornbread. You'd burn the house down. He grinned. Exactly. We packed my things the following weekend. 2 suitcases, a box of cookbooks, my hope jar, and the locket from my son. I kept it. Not because I needed the apology, but because it reminded me of who I was when he still saw me clearly. I moved into the cottage on a Tuesday. It rained. The roof leaked a little. The heater clicked when it ran. But it was mine. I slept that night under a quilt I made 10 years ago before the world turned cold. I dreamed of rosemary and letters and candlelight, and I woke up smiling. I settled into the little cottage like it had always been, waiting for me. There was a small front garden bed, half choked with weeds and winter roots, but I cleared it anyway, kneeling on an old towel gloves damp with earth, my knees groaning in protest. I planted rosemary first, always rosemary. It had followed me from place to place, rooted in memory. Then came thyme mint and 2 hopeful tomato plants. Inside I unpacked slowly. I hung up the thrifted curtains I found months ago, soft white cotton with tiny embroidered daisies. I placed my cookbooks on the windowsill above the sink. A photograph of Lucas at age 4, back when his arms wrapped easily around my neck, sat on a small shelf beside the stove. The kitchen was narrow. The oven needed a good cleaning, but when I cooked in it, the space filled with warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. The first meal I made was lentil stew. I brought 2 bowls to the shelter the next morning, one for Karen and one for Ray, who was having a rough week. The rest I left simmering for whoever needed it. Every Tuesday and Friday I walked back to volunteer, no longer out of necessity, not to feel useful, but because that kitchen had become a sacred space. The smell of garlic, the clatter of dishes, the quiet gratitude of women rediscovering their dignity, one bite at a time. One evening, as I sat with Ray folding napkins, she asked, "Do you think people can change?" I considered this. "Yes," I said, "but not all of them will. And it's not your job to wait around and find out." She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. We didn't need to say who we were talking about. Spring crept in, gently, almost bashfully. One morning I woke to birdsong and sunlight spilling through my bedroom window like honey. I stood barefoot in the kitchen brewing tea, the scent of rosemary and lemon balm drifting in from the open sill. I hadn't been back to Juniper Lane, not even driven past. Some doors once closed don't need checking. But I'd thought of Lucas often. His picture remained on the shelf. And sometimes when I stirred soup or folded laundry, I whispered to him quietly, like a prayer drifting through steam. I hoped he was growing well. I hoped he remembered the stories I told him, the lullabies, the quiet strength of a woman who had once folded socks and dried tears and set 4 bowls at the table, never expecting one to be left empty. One morning in April, a letter arrived. It was from Lucas. The envelope had crayon on it. The return address was familiar, though I didn't flinch. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. Dear Nana, we moved again. Daddy says we're closer to town now. I have a new school. It's okay. I miss your soup. Mom lets me write you when I finish my homework. Can I come visit sometime? I have a drawing for you. It's a garden with little flowers. I think you'd like it. I miss you. Love, Lucas. I held the letter in both hands. It felt like sunlight. That evening I wrote back, Dear Lucas, thank you for writing to me. Your letter made my whole day brighter. I do have a garden now. It's small, but the rosemary is growing strong. Maybe one day when it's safe and time feels just right, you can come see it. We'll pick tomatoes together, and yes, we'll make soup. Until then, keep drawing, keep growing, and always remember that you are deeply, unshakably loved. Love, Nana. I tucked in a small packet of rosemary seeds and a picture of the garden bed just starting to bloom. I didn't need anything else. Not an apology, not a grand reunion, not even closure. I had something rarer, a peaceful beginning that didn't need to rewrite the ending. The sun dipped low that evening. I lit a candle, the same kind I used to set at the shelter window. This time it glowed in my own. For me, by summer the cottage felt like it had always been mine. The rosemary bush had tripled in size, thick and fragrant, brushing against the porch steps like a loyal dog. My tomatoes, bless their stubborn little hearts, were finally ripening warm and heavy in my palms by late July. Inside the walls carried quiet now, not silence. There's a difference. Silence is what I felt after being told there was no space for me. Silence is cold, dismissive. But this quiet, it was soft, alive. The kind that hums beneath a peaceful life. I filled it with new things, the sound of birdsong, through open windows, the bubbling of stew, on the stovetop laughter, from the women at the shelter as they visited for tea. Yes, they came now, 1 or 2 at a time. Some still called me Miss Eleanor. Some just said Mama. I didn't correct them. I never thought I'd open my home to others again, but it turned out the safest place to give love from is a place you built with your own hands. One afternoon, Ray showed up with a bouquet of wildflowers, all wrapped in a scrap of brown paper. "These are from the trail behind the church," she said, cheeks flushed. "I thought they'd look good on your table. I placed them in a mason jar by the window. They did look good. They looked like home." Later that week, I got another letter from Lucas. His handwriting had gotten better, steadier. He wrote about his new school, how he was learning about plants, and how he told his class his Nana could grow anything, even from nothing. I wept after reading that, not because I was sad, but because it was the first time I truly believed that maybe, just maybe, I had taught him something lasting. Not about soup or schoolwork, but about resilience. About what grows when everything else is taken from you. That same night, as twilight sank over the garden, I wrote the final page in my newest journal. I am not a leftover. I am not a burden, an extra, or someone to outgrow. I am a woman who rebuilt her life from the silence they left behind. I am not bitter. I am blooming. The porch light buzzed on automatically. The moths danced. The air was sweet with basil and honeysuckle. I sat in my chair and rocked slowly. The hope jar sat on the small table beside me, nearly full. Folded scraps pressed tight, little testaments of joy, of strength, of moments that might have gone unnoticed but never unloved. One last time I added a note. I lived on after being left behind, and in that living I found myself again. The wind rustled the trees gently. Somewhere a child laughed in the distance. A dog barked. The world turned quiet and slow. I closed my eyes and whispered a thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to the life I'd made, the woman I'd become, and to the soft, unshakable knowing that I would never again beg for space at someone else's table. Because now I had built my own. The cottage was quiet that morning, not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that wraps around you like a warm shawl, the kind you don't rush to shake off. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot, cradling a cup of tea. Outside the garden shimmered under a soft golden light. My rosemary had bloomed delicate blue flowers. The tomatoes were heavy on their vines, and even the mint, always wild, seemed content in its small patch by the back fence. I breathed in slow and deep. It had been a year, a full circle of seasons, since I'd stood with a ladle in hand, heart cracked wide open, listening to my son say words that changed everything. A year since I packed my things without a goodbye, since I slept in my car with the heater wheezing and my chest hollow. Now I woke in my own bed, made tea in my own kitchen, wrote letters on my own time. I made soup for women who once believed they had no place left to belong. And I did it not because I needed to be needed, but because I finally knew I was enough. Henry came by that afternoon, his arms full of fresh corn and gossip from the flea market. He'd aged in small ways, slower steps, longer naps, but he smiled more now. His laugh wasn't a rare thing anymore. We ate dinner on the porch, buttered corn, and leftover meatloaf, and talked about nothing important. It felt like everything. When he left, he pressed a folded slip of paper into my hand. "What's this?" He shrugged. "Thought it should go in your jar." He walked away before I could read it. I opened it under the porch light. "You came back to life, and in doing so, you taught me how to do it too." I clutched it to my chest. Later, in the soft lamp glow of my living room, I added it to the hope jar. The paper crinkled against the others, each one a quiet monument to healing. I sat for a long time, staring out the window, watching the moon rise. And then I took out one last blank scrap. The very last in the stack. With steady hands I wrote, "I am no longer the woman who left in silence. I am the woman who found her voice on the other side of pain." And she did not whisper. She bloomed. I folded it slowly, carefully, and placed it on top. Then I turned out the light, crawled into bed, and pulled the quilt to my chin. I didn't dream of soup or silence that night. I dreamed of my own hands planting something new again and again. Because life, even after heartbreak, continues to grow. And I had finally learned how to let it. 300 words now. Slow down. Soften. Let it breathe. The cottage is quiet tonight. Not the aching quiet of being left behind. No. This quiet hums with something gentler. Something earned. My windows are open. The curtains shift with the breeze. Outside, the rosemary rustles against the siding like a woman whispering back to the past, telling it she's not afraid anymore. I sit at the kitchen table, the locket resting in my palm, the hope jar beside me, full now, almost overflowing. Each note inside it a heartbeat, a memory, a moment, where I chose to stay soft instead of breaking. I light a candle. I don't need it to see. I just need it to remember. This life wasn't the one I planned. I had dreamed of a large dining table filled with laughter and my children and my children's children. I'd imagined hands reaching for second helpings, someone saying, "Mom, you've outdone yourself again." Instead, I found a smaller table, but it holds enough. It holds me. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or full circles. Some stories end with a woman planting rosemary by her front door, her hands in the dirt, her breath steady. A woman who knows now, deep in her bones, that she doesn't have to be everything to everyone to be worthy of love. She only has to be her, and that is finally beautifully enough.